Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great day. So, I just wanted to talk a little bit today about the revelations we've just gotten about how army building is going to work in the new edition of Age of Sigmar. I also just had to really decide if I wanted to also talk about the previous revelation regarding the priority roll. But you know what? I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think when it comes to the priority roll, and I think I've said this before too, I'm kind of a little tired of talking about it because I've had so many conversations over the years regarding the random turn mechanic and how it's been structured and how it might even be structured in the new edition. I just feel it's just such a polarizing thing. I just don't think no matter what you say or what you do, I think there's just too many people who either love or hate it. And honestly, I'm kind of just, I'm a little bit tired of talking about it, especially with the limited rules we got, so I'm just going to ignore that for now. Besides, there wasn't really even that much to talk about. The only real thing we got was go and get, like, the random turn could, like, prioritize whether or not you can get battle tactics. We don't even know enough about battle tactics yet to even know what that is. So, anyway, I'm getting on a tangent, excuse me. So, out with the old, in with the different. So from what I'm kind of noticing here, there's actually, even though there wasn't a ton of information given, it did give a major amount of context of what the new game is going to look like. Because one of the biggest things, along with I would also say like points and sub faction abilities, is how exactly our army is going to be constructed in the new edition. Because it's one of the foundational principles of the game. Like I said, along with points. So some of the big things we got out of this is that it's definitely a scale down from what we had in third edition, especially when we got into whole things like, you know, sub faction abilities and detachments and so yeah, like, sorry, battalions. While it's definitely scaled down, how it functions is very similar, which I'm going to get to in a minute. Another big thing I've noticed is that we are actually doing away with unit types. Yeah, like pretty much the only real unit type, if you even want to call it that, is just the difference between a hero and a non-hero. Things like battle line, behemoth, artillery, that's all gone. Basically, a unit is a unit and a hero is a hero, and how they interact with each other depends on a lot of things. Now, I'm assuming things like, you know, keyword related, like monster and maybe like infantry, maybe or something like, you know, monster, or, you know, like flying. Those will probably all stay, but we need to actually see the war scrolls for that. And also, it looks like we're getting rid. They're going to get rid of the older battalions, as I did expect, because a lot of people have definitely complained over the years that battalions were just, you know, they were unbalanced. There were too many auto takes, and then you got into like the real hairy situation of what do you do with, like, you know, army specific battalions. Like GW just couldn't figure out how to balance them properly because the community just kept finding ways to break them. So honestly, I'm, like, again, as I mentioned before, I was kind of agnostic to them. So if they wanted to keep them, great. If they want to get rid of them, didn't really affect me. I don't really care. But another thing they are pushing for is that they are allowing, the whole idea of this though, like, you know, the getting rid of like the unit types, the battalions, all this kind of stuff. It's basically to give players maximum flexibility with the least amount of conditions. Like I said, as people have pointed out, third edition allowed for very great amount of variety with army building. Like, there was so much flexibility with the armies, you know, with all the infantry or all monsters or a combination of the two or all cavalry. But the problem I think with a lot of that is that it was very condition based. You know, it was very conditioned on who your general was or who your sub faction was or whether they were in this battalion or that. You know, it just feel like I sometimes felt there were maybe just a few too many hoops you had to go through. And as veteran players would point out, it was not a big deal for them, but some people did say there was concerns that, especially for newer people, it might be a little bit confusing, especially if you're new to the concept, which I think they put that in mind when they were making this, which I'm just going to explain right now. Okay, so let's just go over exactly what replaced it. So based on the information that we were given, what we basically lost from the previous edition was replaced with something completely different. which appears on at least on first glance to look much simpler, but also complicated as well from the intricacies of what it is. So basically, as before in the previous edition, the whole idea of building your army was based around the concept of your general and your battle line, along with what other generic units or behemoths or whatever made up the rest of your army. And then they were usually structured around with a core battalion or an army battalion, which gave you certain abilities. Now, those have basically been replaced with two concepts: the concept of the regiment and the concept of the auxiliary. So basically, so regiment in layman's terms, the way it looks is it's pretty similar to the way the old core battalions were structured for 3rd edition, but there's only one type. And in addition, these are not necessarily, looks like they're not necessarily going to be optional, as your army must include at least one regiment, and you can have a maximum of 5 in your army. And then however many auxiliary you want to fill out the rest. So basically, like that. So yeah. So essentially, as I said, so instead of like battle line and heroes, it's now based on just basically your army is now generally pushed around this core battalion that doesn't really do much except provide some abilities, but mostly it's just how your army is structured, if that makes sense. So, okay, so just to go into what it is, so each regiment, and remember, you must have at least one of these, basically includes 1 hero and up to 3 units. However, you can include up to 4 units if the hero that you chose for that particular regiment is your general. Essentially, so basically, essentially, what this is it's going to be the core building block of how you're going to build your army. Because, as I said, since you can only have 3 units per, to have another 3 units in a regiment, you're going to have to bring another hero and for those 3 more units. So basically, the idea is for every 3 units, you need at least 1 hero. And another big selling point of this is that you can't just include any hero with any unit. Apparently, actually a bit of a spoiler, as they've just given away for how heroes are going to act. Each one is apparently going to have is going to be given. Now, I don't know if this is going to be on the War Scroll or this is going to be like in the General's Handbook, but apparently there's going to be like a listing of what units can be taken with what hero in a particular regiment. And so, for example, they used the Lumineth Realm Lords. So, for example, the Venari Bannerblade, if he is chosen to be the main hero for a particular regiment, only Venari units can be included in that regiment. And then conversely, in another regiment, if you chose an Alar Stone Mage to be your compulsory hero in that regiment, they can only choose Alarith units. And apparently, there's also they've given examples how you can. I think they didn't really give examples, but they gave like implications. So there's probably going to be like heroes, like for example, like maybe a Ghoul King on a Terrorgeist is picked to be the hero. Then probably you could take as Zombie Dragons and Terrorgeist as your mandatory 3 units. So that's probably how they're going. That's probably one of the ways they're going to allow you to do all monster. And as I mentioned, if your general is that hero, then you can bring 4 units. Now, the next big thing that you get from this is that it appears you can only reinforce units if they're in a regiment. So it looks like you might not necessarily. Now maybe I missed it, but it doesn't look like it. It seems to be that auxiliary units can't be reinforced. You can take as many as you want, but you can't reinforce them. So if you want to, only units in the regiment can be reinforced, and also they're no longer allowing you to reinforce twice. But so let's say you have like a unit of liberators, you can reinforce that to double the unit size and double the points, but you can't triple the size of that particular unit. So basically they've taken like the double reinforce for battle line and just letting you reinforce anything. But there is another silver line to this. You can apparently reinforce any amount of times you want. So that basically now you don't have to worry about like, okay, well, how many reinforcement points do I have? You know, like, oh, or like, you know, and you don't have to like, you know, build your army around like, oh, this sub-faction allows you to double reinforce an additional unit. Like, no, you can just reinforce any units in regiments. Doesn't matter as long as you have the points, but you can only reinforce them once. So good in some ways, bad in others. I think much more good than bad in that way because it's less bookkeeping because you don't have to pay it. You don't have to keep track of how many units you can reinforce, and it's much more controllable. So you know you're not just creating like a 2+ Death Star unit, like a unit that you put all your spells on, and it's like, you know, has like 50 wounds that you just can't kill. You know, it's probably done for balancing reasons. So in addition to this kind of is a little bit similar to 40K in a way. By that I mean is that 40K, the whole idea with their ideas is they put like limits to how many amount of units per each you can take. You know, like you can take 6 battle line, or you can take you can't take you can only take certain amount of units at a time, like the rule of 3, as I like to call it, but with much more flexibility. So it kind of, so I think this is, so the way I'm kind of seeing this is they're taking what they kind of created with 3rd edition, but then also adapting some of the innovations they did for 40K 10th edition, but allowing for a little bit more flexibility in my opinion. Okay, so now that I went over the basics, now let's go over some of the more intricate little things that I noticed from these change-ups. Okay, so one big thing I noticed about this is, again, just besides the fact that you have to take them, the big thing about regiments over auxiliary is that every unit in the regiment counts as a single drop. So for those who probably remember and were here for 3rd edition, that's basically the same principle as that big 1-drop battalion everyone and their grandmother was taking over 3rd edition, where everything in the army was just 1 drop, and everyone loved it because everyone always wanted to game for less drops to, you know, try to get the first turn. That's basically survived into the new edition in the regiment. So the big thing with that is though, even though you might have like 4 or 5 units in each regiment, they're always 1 drop. But this is conversely to auxiliaries, who always count as a single drop. So it doesn't matter if even though it's 1 unit, and it doesn't matter if it's monster or infantry or cavalry, it's always a single drop. So for example, if your army had 1 regiment and let's say 3 auxiliary units, it would count, you would count as a 4-drop army, even though technically you probably have closer to maybe like 8 or 10 units in the actual army itself. And that's pretty much how they're kind of pushing the whole idea of flexibility, in that, you know, once you have your regiment, you can bring, the auxiliary allows you to bring whatever the heck you want. Because remember, there's no unit types anymore. Battle line and behemoths are a thing of the past. You can bring as many as you want. However, there are certain drawbacks to this. As I mentioned, auxiliaries are always count as 1 drop. So the more you bring, the harder it's going to be for you to get fewer drops in your opponent for that first turn, if I understand it correctly. In addition, they also have a new rule in that whoever has the least amount of auxiliary, get this, they actually get a bonus. So for example, let's say if you had less auxiliary units than your opponent, you would actually get a bonus command point at the beginning of every battle round. And one thing I actually noticed from this is that it actually doesn't say specifically that you also had to have the lowest number of drops. So case in point right here, even if you have like a larger number of overall drops at your opponent, as long as you have less auxiliary choices in your army, you can still get it. So that's actually could be, if I'm reading that correctly, that actually could be something you could game for. Because one thing they definitely have made a point in pretty much all these articles, command points are going to be a lot harder to get, and they're also going to be a lot more important in the new game. And I'm not exactly sure entirely what they mean by that, because again, we need to see what command points entail, what the command abilities are, what's this whole idea of like greater interactivity in each other's turns. Depending on the severity of that, the whole idea of even just an extra command point could be a big deal, especially because they've also made another big deal in that they're going to be a lot harder to get. Like, case in point, they've said they're taking out basically all army abilities to generate command points. So that's a very interesting thing, because that was one thing I did notice in the previous couple editions, that the ability to generate additional command points was becoming more and more a thing. Like, it was becoming something you could even game for a little bit. And as I mentioned before, you can no longer double reinforce units. And again, it seems to be that you can only reinforce units in regiments. Again, probably if that is true, I think the reason they did that was to encourage you to maybe bring more regiments. Like, not just so if you want to reinforce a lot of units, that would encourage you to stay in the regiment structure rather than just, as I said, bring one mandatory regiment and then just fill out the rest of your army with like 10 auxiliary. Like, they're really pushing the idea of the regiment being the main building block of an army, and the auxiliary is just to give you flexibility, not the other way around. Another big thing where they mentioned is also sub-factions are staying, but they're changing to something called battle formations. And judging by how they're describing this, it seems to be it's actually in some ways a lot more similar to the way 40K detachments have become in 10th edition for them. Like, for example, like because the wording they used was the whole idea of the sub-factions is now based more around fighting style rather than a specific faction. Like, like instead of it's basically like how a style of how an army fights than whether an army is Gristlegore or Hollowmorn in Flesh Eater Courts, for example. And again, this is very similar to 40K, where instead of having specific detachments for, let's say, like the Black Templars or the Blood Angels, or the Imperial Fists, they instead have detachments that encourage a type of play style that would encourage you to play how that chapter would be. So that's probably what they're bringing here. Now, I don't think it's not probably going to be exactly like 40K, because 40K brought every single detachment is basically just a whole new army rule style with its own unique enhancements. From the way it looks, because another thing I want to bring up is command traits, which are being renamed heroic traits, artifacts, spells, and prayers are all staying, and I don't see them creating a whole new tables for each battle formation. So I think what's probably going to happen is the battle formation is going to be similar to third, where it's basically just going to give you a single rule, but that rule is going to encourage a type of play style, and you just basically just use the same heroic traits and artifacts regardless of what battle formation you take. That's probably what's going to happen. Another big thing is also command traits are, as I mentioned, command traits, which are now hero traits, artifacts, spells, prayers. As I mentioned, they're all staying. But another big thing to keep in mind, however, is command traits are not just for generals now. One thing they said is the reason they renamed it to heroic traits is apparently that any hero can be given it, not just your general. And so I'm not exactly sure what that means. Does that mean you only get one heroic trait, but you can give it to any unit, not just your general? Or is it going to be similar to third edition, where there's going to be ways that you can take multiple enhancements? So is there ways that I can get an extra heroic trait and give it to another hero, and give this other hero another one, and then I can get an artifact to multiple heroes? I don't know. We need more information. But for those worrying, no, it's not going the way of 40K, where they're taking out all the different spell and prayer tables. Those are all staying. It's just we're just kind of cutting away just a little bit on reliance on things like battle traits and sub factions. So what is the potential of all this? Well, One of the big things is that we're going to be keeping a lot of the army flexibility that we had from third edition, but it's no, as I mentioned, it's no longer tied to sub factions or generals. So how I mentioned before is like in third edition, the whole idea of creating like a unique army that let's say that went all monster or all cavalry. It all had to do with, okay, who was your general or what was your sub faction, because those two things more often than not unlocked certain units as battle lines. So you bring like you bring the Gristle Gore sub faction for Flesh Eater Courts to bring all monster. Or in like Cities of Sigmar, like they're all like you generally had to bring certain particular units as generals to unlock new battle line units. Not anymore, because again, there are no unit types anymore. Basically, everything is battle line. If you want to look at it more simply. So essentially, what they're doing is they're keeping all of the flexibility of the previous edition, but again, they're just basically cutting it down to its core concept. It's not based on what allows you to unlock unit types. What they're doing is they're letting you bring anything, but they're putting in they're filtering it through the regiment and auxiliary structure. Now, and in addition to this, I do actually think that if I'm really thinking it over, I think this actually does have some potential. Now, this will require some play testing. This will require to see how this interacts with certain armies and their particular rules. This will require more context and what exactly else is in the book, like is it besides the auxiliary and regiments. But I do think the regiment style, the regiment style of army building is a nice template to build off from when you're designing your army, because again, you only have, because it's basically the same as it was before. You only need one hero and 3 units to start with, but again, they don't have to be the old battle line. So for example, like with Stormcast Eternals, I don't have to bring infantry. I can just bring my dragons if I unlock them with a certain army. In addition to that, another thing that I really like about this too is that this does help remove some of the unbalancing from the old core battalions. One thing I was noticing a lot more, especially towards the end of the life of third edition, was battalions just can't seem to balance. Like they're not game breaking, but there's just too many battalions that are obvious auto takes. There's too many battalions that just don't do enough. The unique battalions in each of the armies are laughably unbalanced against each other or even between each other in the books themselves. Like it's just one of those things where it was a good idea. It's just GW just clearly just didn't have the foresight to balance it properly in the long term. So I guess they're just basically instead of trying to fix a broken clock, they just took it all out and just replaced it with one battalion, the regiment style, is just much more easier to balance. Now, I don't know how long that's going to last, because we all know as rules are added onto editions, how long until the regiment gets an additional buddy, where instead of the regiment, we also have the brigade, the brigade battalion, or whatever. So we'll see what happens there. And again, as I mentioned before, this is a lot more similar to 40K, where again, before in previous editions of 40K, they had so many different unit types. They had infantry, they had fast attack, they had heavy support, blah blah blah. But in 10th edition, they cut that all away and just replaced it with more limited hero types. They had epic heroes, they had characters, they had battle line. But the thing is, though, even with all that, the problem with that was, though, even though they cut back all there still was too much room for abuse. So they had to include a rule of 3 restriction. Warhammer Age of Sigmar so far is not using anything like that. So into this, as far as I can see, there's no limitation on how many of any one unit you can bring. So for example, if you want to do Idoneth Deepkin and you want to do an all shark army, go for it. If you're doing if you're doing like Stormcast Eternals and you want to bring all dragons, go for it. You know, you can have like nine storm, storm drake guard, or or 10 star drakes in an army if you have the points for it. That's what I mean. So that was the biggest thing that I was actually a little bit worried about, because I was hearing rumors that GW was going to be introducing the whole like rule of 3, where you can only bring like 3 of any one war scroll into an army. I'm glad they're keeping that out, because I think that would have been too jarring, because that one person, who did have his army as all sharks, his army would have basically now been illegal in all contexts. So I'm glad they didn't do that. We did not. Age of Sigmar never really had a problem too much with one unit spam. At least not to the same extent 40k did, in my opinion. So I'm glad they didn't decide to go in that way, but they're still allowing new ways to balance it. So that I think I really like. Now, overall, as I've mentioned, I think I've seen definitely more good than bad in this particular reveal. However, with all things, it does bring concerns in some areas. Well, one of the big things I'm noticing, and I've seen some people say this already. So what's going to happen with the whole thing with sub-factions? Because one of the big things people liked about sub-factions is that it allowed them to throw in a certain amount of flavor, and just to give the idea you're playing, your favorite sub-faction. Like one of the big selling points of Cities of Sigmar is that you get to play as a particular city. Like for people who really liked Hammerhall, or people who really liked Misthaven. You get to, if you play as a sub-faction, you're basically playing as that army in the lore. You can paint up your army that way and use their whole style. That's a kind of like, there's a certain level of immersion people like. Now, but again, this whole changing up of making the sub-factions now more based around a play style, some people are saying this could end up similar to like with 40k, where, you're not, like, for example, you're not really playing as like, the Imperial Fist. You're just playing a detachment that gives you rules that encourage you to play like the Imperial Fist. But technically, they could be anything. I see some pros and cons to this line of thinking. Because, like, for example, what the pros with that is, like, I've just mentioned cons, but a pro to that is this allows you to have more flexibility to use, like, less well-known factions. Like, for example, in Cities of Sigmar, even though we have like 11 sub-factions or whatever, there's still a lot of cities in the lore that people like, but just aren't included in the book, because you can't include every single city in the Cities of Sigmar. There'd be like dozens upon dozens upon dozens of them. So this just allows more narrative flexibility, especially for the writers when they're balancing rules. Again, this is either a pro or a con, depending on which side of the fence you're on. I don't think there's a middle ground. So also, another thing now this is honestly not that big of a deal. It's just more of a philosophical question. Like, was the loss of unit types really necessary? Like for example, like because right now, as I said, we no longer have things like battle line or behemoths or artillery, etc. But I don't know. Was getting rid of them really that big of a deal? Like, I don't know, because like the way regiments like kind of work now, it basically just kind of works the same way battle line used to work. Like, for example, if you're here, you take your hero. You take a hero as a general and unlock certain battle line, but that kind of works with how regiments do now. Like each regiment, you have to take a particular hero to have a certain number of units in that particular regiment. Because remember, not every single hero and not every single unit can go together in the same regiment. Every hero has a specific type of units that it can be included. Again, it's basically the same thing that it was before, only I guess it just allows more flexibility, because before you only get one general that just unlocks a certain type of battle line. This just basically every single type of hero just allows other types of units to go in a regiment, which innately also has effects on reinforcing, similar to battle line. Because remember, if you unlocked a unit as battle line before, that allowed it, like bonuses to like when you want to reinforce the unit. So I just kind of feel like in a lot of ways, when you really start getting down to the nitty gritty, it's actually it basically does everything that the old style of army construction they just do it in a different way, and it also allows you to go about it in I guess a more flexible way as well. Um, my only concern with that is that okay, you're taking away the complexity of the unit types, but now are you kind of also just now putting in more complexity because now you have to figure out, okay, well, I want this unit to be in a regiment, but I need a specific type of hero. Do I have that hero? And I can only have like 5 regiments in my army. I like imagine if you're because like okay, you may think well that's still a lot of units, but don't forget some armies can put in like a ton of units. Like for example, big units of Skaven, big units of Gloomspite gets. I'm just saying, like, you might, are we just going to run into basically, like, new ways of new, like, new headaches when we're making armies? Like, did the fixes for old editions headaches, maybe, are they just going to create new ones? I don't know. And again, like I just mentioned, this is also kind of like just locking us into taking more heroes. Because again, every regiment needs a hero, but you can't just put any unit in a regiment. It needs its specific type of hero. Because remember, Stone Mage is needed for Alarith units. So, again, is this like, so, because I remember, like, a lot of armies I've seen were bigger on, like, put more emphasis on regular units rather than putting so many heroes in it. Like, is this just gonna, like, force people to have to, not only take, but maybe even have to buy more units, like more heroes. Like, because for example, you can only put 3 units for every hero in a regiment. But imagine if, let's say, you have an army that has a lot of similar types of infantry. Let's say, like, with like, like Lumineth Realm Lords and you have like an all Alarith army. Like, does that mean I'm gonna have to buy more Stone Mages just to put them all just so they all fit in a regiment and I don't have to take them all as auxiliary? Like, again, I kind of just hope this doesn't turn into like basically GW like blackmailing people into having to bring like a certain number of heroes. And I know someone's gonna say, well, no, you don't have to bring heroes, and you don't have to put them all in regiments, but but again, at the end of the day, meta kind of inevitably starts to influence how people design their armies. So I just wonder how this is going to turn out. So, in summation, after reading through everything and looking at the little details and the implications that they could create, and again, forgive me if I got some things wrong or that I missed some stuff. It's just my first time seeing this, and again, I would probably need more information from the rest of the actual rules to give a proper judgment how good or bad these are. But from what I am seeing, I think I like what I see. Yeah, like overall, I think what they did is that they took the old like hero and battle line system of the previous edition and they simplified it, streamlined it, but still allowed for maximum flexibility, but I think with just enough restrictions to encourage thematic armies, because I think that was ultimately the main point of changing it up like this. It was to create incentives for people to bring more thematically themed armies, like, because, like, instead of, what we're kind of seeing right now, like, what's a perfect example of right now? Big Wog. Like, a big thing I'm seeing, like, where people bring, like, a Big Wog army, but they only bring, like, that shaman that does the dance kill with its mask, and then just bring all, like, Iron Jaws, Like, this is to encourage you to, bring heroes with the type of units that they would work with. And also to, but still allow you to go, like, if you want to create, like, a fluffy thematic army, that you can, because the auxiliary is where your flexibility comes from, which basically, the auxiliary is basically replacing the old, like, conditional battle line. So, if you want to bring, like, max amount of sharks, go for it. You just need to bring 1 regiment, a hero, hopefully a hero that unlocks the sharks to be allowed in the regiment, and then just fill out the rest of your army with auxiliary sharks. Go for it. Yeah, I think, and another thing I've noticed is that it's also really driving home the implication that command points are going to be a much more valuable resource this edition. The very fact that they seem to be implying that getting an additional command point each battle round seems to be like they seem to be implying that's a big deal because as it stands right now, just getting an additional battle command point, for your turn is just isn't like it's good. Don't get me wrong, but it's not really like I wouldn't really call that like like an incentive to like structure your army around. Like I'm not going to structure my army right now just to get an additional command point every now and then. But the fact that they are actually implying that people will do that again seems to drive home the point that command points are going to be much more scarce, and they're going to be and command abilities are going to be a lot more important. So after army construction, that's the next thing I want to see. I want to see what they're doing with command abilities and command points because everything is implying that it's going to have a much bigger impact of the game than it is right now. And right now it has a big impact. So I really need to see what's going on with that. So overall, I think people can relax. Age of Sigmar, ironically, is actually looking out to be that it's going to be flexible, but it's going to be not only more flexible than 40k, but it's actually starting to look like it's actually might be in some ways more complex, which is ironic because when Age of Sigmar started out, one of the big talking points is that it was a much simpler way to play a GW game than 40k. Like 40k was supposed to be the more advanced system, and Age of Sigmar was supposed to be the leaner, more easy to learn system. But now it's kind of looking like they're actually keeping more complexity in some areas than 40k did. And that's not to say that 40k doesn't currently have flexibility, but like I'm just saying that the whole like we're getting a lot more things with tables. We're keeping a lot more of our artifacts and spell tables. We're keeping a lot. We seem to have much more greater ability to be flexible with unit selection. Yeah, like if I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I personally think I think I prefer that, but maybe some people disagree. Maybe people feel that by principle Age of Sigmar should be simpler than 40k in most areas. I don't know, you decide. But overall, I think I like what I see with the army construction, but this needs to be play tested more. That's all I'm gonna say. Well, anyway, that's all I have on this. Hope you enjoyed the video, and see you for the next big update. Cheers.